She looked me dead in the eyes across the dinner table and called me a parasite. 3 years. 3 years of paying bills, fixing roofs, filling prescriptions, skipping promotions, and sleeping in my childhood bedroom to keep her world from collapsing, and that was the word she chose. Parasite. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already started building the trap they were about to walk straight into. My name is Naomi. I'm 33. And this is the story of how the night I lost everything became the night I took it all back. Part 1: The Life I Gave Up. Before I explain what I did, you need to understand what I sacrificed. 3 years ago, I had a life. A real one. My own apartment across town. A steady job as an operations coordinator. A savings account that was slowly growing. And a side dream I was quietly nurturing, a financial organizing service for women trying to rebuild after divorce or debt. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. Then my father died. Not slowly. Not with warning. One week he was arguing with me about whether I'd changed the oil in my car on time. The next week I was standing in a black dress beside his casket watching my mother age 10 years in 10 days. After the funeral, the house fell apart almost as fast as she did. Bills piled up unopened. She stopped tracking her medication. She stopped cooking. She barely slept. The mortgage was falling behind. The furnace needed repairs. Property taxes were overdue. My brother Derek called twice. Said he was sorry. Said things were complicated. Then vanished back into his own life like smoke. So I made a choice. I gave up my lease, packed my apartment into storage, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. I told myself it would only be for 6 months. Maybe less. That was the lie I told myself, because the truth would have been too heavy to carry. From that first morning back, my life became a system built around keeping that house breathing. I woke up early to make sure she ate before her pills. I handled groceries, utilities, insurance paperwork, the surprise plumbing issue in winter, the roof leak in spring, and every hidden cost that comes with a house old enough to have both history and serious problems. I covered most of the mortgage when her savings ran thin. I paid for the furnace repair when the old unit died in January. I handled the property tax schedule so the county stopped mailing notices in red ink. At work, I turned down opportunities that required longer hours or travel. Someone had to be home when the electrician ran late. Someone had to be there if she had another dizzy spell. The strange part? I didn't resent it, not then. I thought this was what family did. I thought sacrifice meant love. And my mother said all the right things. Every single time she said it, I believed it. I believed I was building something solid. Not just rescuing her from a bad season, but earning a place in her life that no one could erase. That was the version of our story I carried in my chest right up until the night she chose a different version, and expected me to disappear quietly. Part 2: The Signs I Ignored. The betrayal didn't start at that dinner table. It started months earlier, in smaller ways. The kind that are easy to dismiss when you're exhausted and still desperate to believe the best about someone you love. Derek had always been the kind of man people excused before he even messed up. Charming when he wanted something. Careless once he got it. City to city, job to job, relationship to relationship, always leaving some unpaid bill or broken promise behind him. My mother had treated him like a fragile prodigy his entire life. As if the world was too harsh for him and the rest of us were supposed to cushion every fall. He called just often enough to stay in her good graces, then disappeared before any real responsibility could land on him. So when she started smiling at her phone again, taking private calls in the laundry room, asking questions about my work schedule that felt too specific to be casual, I noticed. I just didn't understand the shape of it yet. Around the same time, a man from her church group started appearing more often. His name was Ron Mercer. And from the moment he walked into that house, he carried himself like someone testing whether he could rearrange the furniture without being told no. Polite in public. Smug in private. He had a habit of saying cruel things with a laugh at the end, as if that turned them into jokes. He'd look at me over dinner and ask if I'd ever considered getting my own place again. He'd say things like, "It must be nice having a built-in safety net." I kept telling myself I could tolerate him if he made her happy. But I started noticing my mother changing around him. Sharper with me. More defensive. More willing to rewrite facts in real time. The kitchen I scrubbed was suddenly never clean enough. The groceries I bought were somehow always wrong. The house I'd been maintaining for years became, in her new version of reality, the place where I had gotten too comfortable. Then came the physical signs. A stack of school enrollment forms appeared on the dining room table, and vanished the second I walked in. The garage was cleaned out for no reason anyone could explain. 3 twin mattresses were delivered one Friday afternoon while I was at work. My mother said the church was doing a donation drive. Changed the subject before I could press her. One Saturday I came home from a pharmacy run and found 2 boxes of my winter clothes taped shut near the basement stairs. She said she was just helping me organize. Then one night, I heard her laughing softly on the phone. And she said, "No, she still has no idea." That sentence lodged in me like a splinter. My best friend Maya told me something was wrong long before I admitted it. We were having coffee after work when she looked at me and said, "Naomi, you're acting like someone who knows a storm is coming and keeps pretending it's just wind." I laughed it off. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But deep down, I was already bracing. What finally cracked through my denial was something small and devastatingly casual. My mother asked me one evening, very offhandedly, whether I could clear out my bedroom closet soon because they might need more storage for guests. Guests. Not family. Not children. Guests. As if the room I had been sleeping in for 3 years, the room I'd returned to while rebuilding her entire life with my own money and time, could be reassigned with one vague sentence. Even then, I still told myself it would work out. I still told myself there were lines she wouldn't cross. I didn't know yet that she had already crossed them in her mind, long before she said the words out loud. Part 3, The Dinner. The night everything blew open started with my favorite dinner. And that should have warned me right away. My mother only cooked like that when she wanted a conversation to go her way. Pot roast with mashed potatoes. The better plates. A bottle of wine on a weeknight. Ron was there too, pretending to help while mostly hovering. The whole thing felt staged from the moment I walked in. For the first 10 minutes, she made small talk so artificially cheerful it made me more nervous than silence would have. Then she put down her fork, looked at me directly, and said Derek was moving back. I froze. She kept going before I could process it. He'd been having a hard time. Things had fallen apart. He was coming with his 3 kids and they needed stability. That part alone didn't make me angry. I was already calculating how we could make it work, guest room for the kids, maybe turn the office into another bedroom. Then she said the part that changed everything. She said the children needed more space. That Derek needed time to get back on his feet. So I needed to move out by the weekend. My brain actually rejected the sentence. I let out a short laugh and asked if she was joking. She smiled, this strange, light smile, like she was enjoying how stunned I looked, and told me she was completely serious. I sat there waiting for some correction. Some explanation that made it less insane. Instead, she doubled down. Derek had 3 children to think about. I was grown and capable. I had stayed long enough. And then Ron, who had no legal right, no moral authority, and certainly no emotional history in that house, leaned back in his chair and said, "Maybe this is the push you need to finally build your own life." Something cold moved through me. Not pain. Not yet. Just clarity. I reminded her calmly that I was the one who had been paying most of the bills. That I paid for the furnace. Paid for the roof. Covered the property tax gap. That Derek hadn't been here when she couldn't get out of bed, when I drove her to specialists, sat in emergency rooms with her, turned down promotions because someone had to keep this place functioning. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed. Then she said, "You act like helping your own family bought you ownership." I said, "No. I act like being treated fairly should come with not being thrown out of the house I helped keep standing." That was when her face changed completely. All the softness vanished. She leaned forward and called me a parasite. She said I had stayed too long, taken too much, and built my identity around clinging to a house that was only supposed to be temporary. She said Derek needed her more. She said those children mattered more right now. She said it wasn't healthy for me to keep hanging on. Ron put his hand on her arm like she was the injured party. And that was it. I stood up. Pushed my chair in. Said nothing. I walked out before she could feel generous enough to offer me a week, or cruel enough to shorten it to 3 days. I drove until I couldn't see our street anymore. Then I parked outside a 24-hour grocery store and sat in the dark with both hands on the wheel, trying to understand how a person could spend 3 years proving their love and still lose to someone who had barely shown up. When I finally checked my phone, there was one text from my mother. "Please don't be dramatic. We can discuss logistics tomorrow." Logistics. That was the word she used for dismantling my life. By the time I went back to the house later that night, I was no longer confused. I was alert. Part 4: What I Found in the Dark. The house was quiet when I slipped inside. But the evidence of what they had planned was everywhere. Once I stopped looking at it like a daughter and started looking at it like someone being removed. 2 of my father's framed photos had been taken down from the hall and leaned against the laundry room wall to make space for cheap children's wall decals still in a shopping bag. The linen closet had been half emptied. My bedroom door was open. Inside, my mother had already moved a box of my shoes into the hallway, as if momentum alone could make me disappear faster. I sat on my bed, opened my laptop, and decided that before I cried again, I was going to learn exactly how long they had been plotting this. The answer came faster than I expected. The joint household account I used for bills showed a withdrawal of $4,000, made 2 days earlier by my mother at the local branch. Money I had moved in over time for taxes, repairs, and emergency costs. I scrolled further. Payment holds for furniture stores. A delivery confirmation for bunk beds. Then I found the real gut punch. My mother had meant to email someone else. But I still had access to the shared home desktop account she sometimes used. And sitting there in the sent folder was a thread between her, Derek, and a friend from church. Subject line: room setup. In it, they talked about timing my removal, whether it would be easier if I was at work when the kids arrived. whether it would be awkward if I made a scene. One message from Derek: just make sure Naomi is out before we get there. I don't want the kids around all that tension. One message from my mother: once she's finally out, the house can feel like family again. I read that line 3 times. Family again. As if I had been some boarder sleeping in a corner all those years, not the person paying to keep the lights on in the very house she was reclaiming. There was also a voicemail from Derek. I listened to it standing in my room, one hand pressed against my forehead. He sounded irritated. Not ashamed. He told my mother he was exhausted, that the kids were tired of living out of suitcases, and that I had better not make this difficult because they had been through enough already. He didn't ask to speak to me. He didn't thank me for a single thing I'd done for our mother. He talked about me the way people talk about weather getting in the way of a plan. That was the exact moment something in me stopped hoping for fairness, and started building strategy. Part 5: Building the Trap. The next morning, I called in late to work and went straight to see Sophie Lane. Sophie was a former college acquaintance who now handled tenant and property disputes. I laid everything out for her without sugarcoating a single word. 3 years of payments. Proof of residency. Repairs I had funded. The lack of formal notice. The $4,000 withdrawal. The emails. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me what no one in that house expected me to know. In the eyes of the law, I was not just a daughter sleeping in a spare room. I was an established resident, with tenant protections. My mother could not legally toss me out with a speech over pot roast and a deadline pulled from thin air. Sophie also said that while the house was still in my mother's name, my documented financial contributions gave me real leverage, especially tied to major household maintenance and shared expense accounts. She didn't promise miracles. She gave me something better. She gave me language. She gave me posture. She gave me options. From her office, I called Maya. By that afternoon, Maya had connected me with a landlord who had a 1-bedroom apartment opening immediately. Small. Above a quiet duplex. Worn hardwood floors and terrible kitchen lighting. I signed the lease that day. Because every inch of it felt honest. Nobody there would call me family while treating me like a problem. For the rest of that week, I became a woman my mother had never bothered to imagine. Efficient. Silent. Unsentimental. I opened a new bank account and moved my personal funds. I printed every receipt I had: roof repairs, furnace replacements, mortgage transfers, utility payments, property tax records, years of documented evidence stacked into a folder. I packed in layers. Small loads to my new apartment after work, carefully timed so no one would notice how much was disappearing. At home, I played agreeable. I told my mother I was looking at options. I told Ron the rental market was harder than I expected. I let them believe panic had made me passive. The whole time, I was arranging the moment they would understand exactly how badly they had misread me. On Friday morning, my mother left early to pick up Derek and the kids from the airport. Ron planned to meet them on the way back. She paused in the kitchen before walking out, using that fake patience people adopt when they think they've already won, and told me she expected most of my things out before they returned. I looked at her over the rim of my coffee mug and thought about how strange it was that she still believed she was setting the terms. The second her car pulled away, I got to work. First, I called the locksmith I had booked 2 days earlier. Then I called the utility companies and removed my name from every account I had been solely managing, making sure final bills and transfer dates were documented in writing. I didn't shut off service illegally. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply ended the quiet, invisible system that had made their comfort effortless for 3 years. The locksmith arrived at 9:30. By 11, every exterior lock on that house had been replaced. While he worked, Maya and my coworker Julian helped me carry out the last of my furniture and the boxes I'd strategically left behind. I kept only what was mine. I didn't touch my mother's things. I didn't damage a single item. On the kitchen table, I left a folder. Bank transfer records. Repair invoices. Tax payment documentation. Household bills going back 3 years. Proof of residency. And a formal letter from Sophie outlining my legal position and requesting reimbursement negotiations. On top of the folder, in my own handwriting, one sentence. Since I was good enough to pay for this house, I was good enough to be treated lawfully. By 12:15, I was standing in my new apartment surrounded by boxes, eating crackers over the sink because I was too wired to sit down. At 12:38, the first call came in. Then another. Then 6 texts in 2 minutes. By 1 o'clock, my phone screen looked like it was having a panic attack. My mother. Derek. My mother again. Derek again. Unknown numbers, probably airport contacts, people borrowing phones. The calls kept stacking. I let them pile up. By the time I finally checked, I had 53 missed calls. 53. The people who had no problem imagining me gone suddenly couldn't function without access to what I had been quietly holding together. Part 6, The Confrontation. I drove back to the house at 2 p.m. I didn't rush. I wanted them to wait. When I turned onto our street, I saw the full scene from halfway down the block. Suitcases on the porch. 3 exhausted children drooping in the afternoon heat. Derek pacing in front of the door like a man auditioning for the role of victim. My mother standing rigid and red-faced, phone in hand. Ron trying the handle again like it might surrender out of respect for his confidence. And because this moment deserved witnesses, 2 neighbors were working in their yards with the kind of intense focus that only happens when people are pretending very hard not to listen. I parked across the street. Got out. Walked toward them slowly, holding nothing but my keys and the calm they had spent 3 years mistaking for weakness. My mother turned first. Her face went from outrage to disbelief the second she saw me. Naomi, what did you do? I secured my residence. Derek snapped that I had lost my mind. One of the kids asked quietly if they weren't allowed to live there anymore. And for half a second I hated every adult in that driveway for putting children in the middle of a power play they hadn't created. Ron stepped toward me and asked if I understood how unacceptable this was. I told him I understood the law a lot better than he did. Then I explained it, clearly, slowly, without shaking. I told my mother she had failed to provide proper legal notice. I told Derek he was not moving into a house maintained by invisible labor anymore. I told all 3 of them that I had documented over 3 years of financial contributions to that property, and that any further attempt to force my removal without legal process would be handled through formal channels. My mother started to interrupt, "It's my house." I cut her off. I reminded her that for 3 years, she had been more than happy to let me act like an owner when bills needed paying. Derek barked that the children needed somewhere to sleep. I said that was a problem he should have considered before planning my removal like a furniture delivery. Ron said I was humiliating my mother in public. I said she should have thought about public humiliation before calling the daughter who kept her afloat a parasite. That shut him up. The most satisfying part wasn't their anger. It was their confusion. They had built this entire plan on the assumption that I would cry, plead, maybe make a chaotic scene, and then quietly disappear with whatever scraps of dignity they chose to leave me. They had not prepared for paperwork. They had not prepared for legal vocabulary. They had not prepared for me to show up calm and already housed. I handed my mother one new key. I told her she could enter. I was not interested in trapping children outside. But the matter of my reimbursement would proceed on lawful terms and in writing. The folder on the kitchen table explained everything. Derek called it extortion. I told him no. Extortion involves threats. This is accounting. My mother looked at me then with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not love. Not guilt. Not even anger. Fear. Mixed with a slow, dawning recognition. She was realizing, maybe for the very first time, that being the reliable child did not mean I would stay obedient forever. One of the kids tugged Derek's sleeve and asked if they could please just go inside. My brother muttered something and grabbed the key from my mother's hand. I stepped aside as they dragged their luggage into the house I had practically subsidized. Then I turned to my mother and gave her one final sentence before walking away. You were right about one thing. I should have built my own life sooner, before you confused my love with permission to use me. I walked back to my car while their voices followed me up the driveway, louder and uglier with every step. And for the first time in 3 years, none of it was mine to fix. Part 7, The Aftermath. Here's what happened to the people who thought removing me would make their lives easier. Derek did not become responsible just because he was back under our mother's roof. He bounced between short-term jobs, contributed less than promised, complained constantly about how expensive everything was. 3 children in that house meant noise, chaos, food costs, school forms, laundry mountains, doctor visits, daily logistics, the exact kind of invisible labor my mother had expected me to absorb in silence for years. Ron lost interest once the reality became inconvenient. It is easy to play kingmaker when someone else is handling all the weight. It is harder when the son you champion treats every household rule like a personal insult and every expense like someone else's problem. There were arguments. Missed payments. At least one incident involving a school pickup mix-up that left my mother crying in a parking lot. The reimbursement, which Sophie helped formalize into a written agreement, mattered less to me over time than what it represented. It was proof on paper that I had not imagined what I gave. Proof that my labor had value, even when the people who benefited from it tried to rename it dependency. 6 months after that afternoon on the driveway, my life had gotten quieter. Cleaner. More honest. I accepted the promotion I would have turned down the year before. With the extra income, I officially launched my side business, helping women organize their finances after divorce, debt, or domestic instability. Every spreadsheet I cleaned up, every overdue account I helped untangle, every budget I helped rebuild felt like handing someone the map I wished I'd had years earlier. Maya said I looked 10 years younger after moving out. I pretended to hate it. She was completely right. I slept better. Laughed more. Started saying no without writing full essays to justify it. The first time I saw my mother alone was on a rainy Tuesday at a pharmacy. She looked smaller somehow. More tired around the eyes, as if the certainty she'd worn at that dinner table had been chipped down by reality. She asked how I'd been. I told her the truth, well, busy, growing. She nodded. Said she'd seen one of my business cards at a bakery in town. Then she said something I didn't expect. Your father would have been proud of what you built. That sentence landed somewhere deep. In the part of me that still remembered wanting her approval. But it didn't undo anything. Healing is not amnesia. A compliment after betrayal does not rewrite the betrayal. What it can do, if you let it, is confirm that you no longer need the person who wounded you to validate the wound before you're allowed to heal from it. We didn't reconcile that day. There was no dramatic apology in aisle 7 between cold medicine and shampoo. But there was a shift. She knew I wouldn't come back to rescue her from choices she had made at my expense. And I knew I didn't need revenge to look like cruelty for it to count. Part 8. What I want you to take from this. The deeper lesson took me longer to learn than the practical one. And it's the one I want you to carry with you. Helping family is not wrong. Loving deeply is not weakness. Sacrifice in the right place can be beautiful. But when love is used to demand silence, unpaid labor, endless forgiveness, or the surrender of your future, it stops being love. It becomes permission for exploitation. Wearing the costume of loyalty. That is not a family value. That is a broken system. The practical lesson is this, and I mean it in the most serious way possible. Kind people need paperwork too. Keep records. Learn your rights. Understand whose name is on what. Do not assume that being morally right will protect you if someone else is willing to be legally ruthless. Boundaries are not just emotional. Sometimes they are financial. Sometimes they are the difference between being erased and being able to stand up straight when someone tries. And here is the truth that matters most, especially for anyone who has been carrying an entire household on their back and been called selfish for wanting fairness. Being needed is not the same as being valued. You are allowed to set it down. Self-respect is not selfishness. It is survival. My life today is not perfect. The kitchen lighting in my apartment is still terrible. But I love that apartment so completely I've stopped apologizing for how often I talk about it. I built it without begging to stay somewhere I wasn't respected. I built it after being called a parasite by people who had fed on my stability for years. And the most powerful thing I know now is this. Your worth is not determined by how useful you are to the people who would discard you the moment someone louder comes along. Your worth is in your character. Your boundaries. Your choices. And your willingness to protect your own future, even when the people hurting you share your last name. If my story teaches anything, I hope it teaches this. Love should never require you to disappear.